Maya Torres caught the smell first. She'd always had a nose for trouble, a lingering sensitivity from a childhood spent navigating the unpredictable currents of foster care before landing at the Pine Valley Children's Home herself. Now, 20 years later, she walked the linoleum hall she once ran down, but with keys jingling at her hip and a walkie-talkie clipped to her belt. At 28, with tired but determined eyes, and a braid that perpetually threatened to unravel from her energetic pace, Maya was the lead caregiver, a title that felt too clinical for the fierce protectiveness she felt for the kids who called this place home. "Leo, come on, buddy," deep breaths, Maya murmured, kneeling beside a thin, pale boy no older than 7. Leo was wheezing, his small chest rattling with each strained inhalation. His blue eyes, usually bright with mischief, were wide with fear, not just from the asthma but from the unusual light bleeding through the window. "Remember what Dr. Evans said? Think of your favorite superhero. Take a big gulp of air like you're flying." Leo squeezed his eyes shut, trying to concentrate on the small, portable nebulizer Maya held. The mist hissed gently, a tiny cloud of relief. He'd been struggling more than usual today, a barometer for the unseen shifts in the environment. Maya gently rubbed his back, her gaze flicking nervously to the window. The orange haze was intensifying, no longer just a tint but a full-blown inferno trying to breach the horizon. Just then, a shriek erupted from the common room. "He touched my Legos!" Maya sighed, but a small smile touched her lips. "Regular kid chaos." She patted Leo's head. "Stay with Miss Jenkins for a minute, okay? Mommy needs to go stop the monster of the Legos." Leo offered a weak smile, already feeling a little better. She strode into the common room, a natural ease in her movements. 2 boys, 10-year-old twins named Caleb and Noah, were locked in a wrestling match over a half-built spaceship. "All right, space cadets." Maya's voice cut through the din, firm but not harsh. "Cease fire. What's the mission briefing?" She quickly de-escalated the situation, explaining the importance of teamwork in galactic construction, subtly reminding them that sharing made everything more fun. This was Maya's world, a messy, loud, occasionally smelly, but deeply loving sanctuary. The Pine Valley Children's Home wasn't perfect. Its paint was peeling in places, the plumbing sometimes groaned in protest, and funding was a constant uphill battle. But Maya, a product of its care, ensured it was filled with warmth, structure, and the unwavering belief that every child deserved a safe place to grow. She knew firsthand the fragility of these lives, the casual indifference of the outside world, and the labyrinthine cruelty of bureaucracy. She'd fought for these kids countless times, advocating for better school supplies, healthier meals, and the simple dignity of being heard. Her current battle, however, was about to begin not with a child's squabble, but with a man who embodied everything she distrusted about the system. "Miss Torres, a word, if you please." The voice, dry and reedy, belonged to Mr. Henderson, the orphanage's director. He stood in the doorway, a trim, anxious man in a perpetually starched shirt and sensible tie. His posture was rigid, his expression perpetually pinched, as if smelling something faintly unpleasant. He held a clipboard like a shield. Maya straightened, a subtle tension tightening her shoulders. "Yes, Mr. Henderson? I've just received Miss Jenkins's incident report from this morning," he began, without preamble. "Regarding the spilled paint in the art room." His emphasis on spilled paint made it sound like a biohazard. Maya blinked. "It was water-based, Mr. Henderson. Easily cleaned. No one was hurt." A few minutes earlier, a particularly enthusiastic finger painting session had culminated in a blue puddle on the floor. "That is not the point, Miss Torres," Henderson sniffed, adjusting his spectacles. "The point is, the report was submitted after the incident occurred, not during or immediately following. This is a clear breach of Protocol 7B, subsection 3. All incidents, regardless of perceived severity, must be documented and reported to directorial staff within 15 minutes of occurrence." He tapped his clipboard with a ballpoint pen. "We cannot afford to be lax on these matters. Our liability, Miss Torres, is paramount." Maya suppressed a sigh. "Our children's well-being is paramount, Mr. Henderson. I was busy making sure the little ones weren't slipping on the paint and that they felt safe after the shock." "Safety is ensured by adherence to policy," Henderson countered, his voice rising slightly. "Policy protects us. Policy protects them. If we are to maintain our funding, our reputation, our very existence, we must be seen to be operating with the utmost professionalism and due diligence." He looked at her over his glasses, his gaze conveying a silent warning. He lived and died by the rulebook, a man so terrified of deviation that he often missed the forest for the meticulously filed trees. Maya merely nodded, knowing further argument was futile. Their priorities were fundamentally opposed. He saw regulations. She saw human beings. The conversation ended, but the acrid smell outside intensified. It was no longer a hint. It was a presence. The local news channel, usually a purveyor of small-town gossip and bake sale announcements, had shifted its tone dramatically. The distant brush fire had become the Oak Ridge blaze, and now the Willow Creek inferno. The crackle of static and the increasingly grave voice of the anchor filled the common room, where the remaining children huddled around the television, their usual boisterous energy replaced by a nervous quiet. The sky outside had turned a sickly, deep orange, almost purple in places, as if the world itself were bruising. Ash, no longer imperceptible, began to fall like dirty, coarse snow against the windows, clinging to the sills and darkening the once bright paint. "Is the sun sick?" asked little Lily, her eyes wide as she pointed at the unnatural sky. Maya knelt beside her, pulling her close. "No, sweetie, it's just a big fire, really far away. The wind is blowing the smoke this way." She tried to sound reassuring, but her own stomach was a knot of icy fear. Leo, nestled on a beanbag chair, coughed again, a wet, rattling sound. His inhaler was getting frequent use. The air filtration system in the old building was clearly struggling. She tried to distract them, pulling out board games and art supplies. "Who wants to draw the bravest firefighters in the world?" she asked brightly, forcing a smile. But their gazes kept drifting to the windows, to the unsettling, apocalyptic glow. One of the older boys, 12-year-old Miguel, who fancied himself a budding meteorologist, pointed to his phone. "Miss Torres, it says the wind is shifting, and the fire is moving fast." Maya's heart hammered. She knew what that meant. The Pine Valley Children's Home was nestled on the edge of a small, dense pine forest, a picturesque setting that suddenly felt like a tinderbox. She found Mr. Henderson in his office, meticulously organizing a stack of invoices. He looked up, annoyed by her intrusion. "Miss Torres, I'm rather busy. Our quarterly budget report is due, and with all this unrest outside, it's proving quite difficult to concentrate." "Mr. Henderson, we need to talk about evacuation," Maya said, her voice strained but firm. "The fire is getting closer. You can smell it, see the ash. Leo is having trouble breathing. We have 23 children here. We can't wait." Henderson sighed, pushing his spectacles higher on his nose. "Miss Torres, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we have a protocol for this. County Emergency Services has a plan. We have designated shelters, evacuation routes, official transport." He gestured vaguely towards a laminated fire escape plan on the wall. "I've already contacted them." "And what did they say?" Maya pressed, a thread of desperation weaving into her tone. "They said they are monitoring the situation, and that we are to shelter in place until notified. They assured me that if an evacuation becomes necessary, official buses will be dispatched." He puffed out his chest slightly, proud of his adherence to the process. "We simply wait for their official instruction. Panicking and acting independently would only create more chaos and put everyone at greater risk. Not to mention the liability." "Liability?" Maya's voice was dangerously low. "Mr. Henderson, there are lives at stake. Our old bus, the yellow one, it barely runs, but it could work. We could get them out now, to the community center. It's only 5 miles away, well within the green zone still." She knew the old bus. It was a relic, used mostly for field trips to the library, but she'd seen the groundskeeper tinkering with it just last week. Henderson recoiled as if she'd suggested arson. "The yellow bus? Miss Torres, that vehicle is not rated for emergency transport. It hasn't passed its safety inspection in 3 years. The insurance alone. And imagine the paperwork. No, absolutely not. We follow the plan. The plan." He emphasized the word as if it were a sacred text. "The plan is waiting for someone else to tell us what to do while the sky is literally on fire," Maya argued, her voice rising, losing her usual composure. "What if they don't get here in time? What if the roads are blocked? What if the power goes out? Then we activate our internal shelter, in-place contingency plan," Henderson stated, completely unperturbed, as if reciting from a manual. "We have bottled water, non-perishable food, and a battery-powered radio. We are prepared for this." Prepared to sit ducks? Maya thought bitterly. She tried one last time. Mr. Henderson, please. Just let us get the bus ready. What's the harm in being prepared? He stared at her, his eyes narrow. The harm, Miss Torres, is the precedent. The harm is undermining authority. The harm is acting outside of established, documented, and approved procedures. I am the director here. My decision is final. We wait. Maya clenched her jaw, her hands fisted at her sides. She wanted to scream, to shake him until he saw the burning reality outside, not the neat little checkboxes on his forms. But she knew it was useless. Henderson was encased in an armor of bureaucracy. She turned and walked out, her heart heavy with a growing sense of dread. She passed a window in the hallway. The orange glow was no longer distant. It was cresting the nearest hill, a hungry, flickering beast devouring the tree line, its tendrils reaching. The smell of smoke was no longer faint. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Maya knew with a terrifying certainty that Henderson's plan was about to become a death sentence. The world went dark, with a sickening pop and a momentary, high-pitched whine. The fluorescent lights in the common room flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the children into a terrifying, smoky gloom. A collective gasp, then a whimper, rippled through the room. Emergency lights, dim and yellow, flickered on in the hallways, but the effect was more eerie than reassuring. The power was out. It's okay, everyone. Maya's voice cut through the sudden silence, remarkably calm despite the panic clawing at her own throat. Just a power hiccup. We've got flashlights and fun games to play in the dark, right? But the children weren't easily fooled. The air, already thick with smoke, felt heavier, harder to breathe. Leo, curled on the beanbag, started to cough, a deep, racking sound that tore at Maya's heart. She rushed to him, fumbling for his inhaler in the dim light, the nebulizer now useless without electricity. She could hear other children starting to cough too, their small lungs protesting the acrid air. Then, a cacophony of urgent tones erupted throughout the building. Emergency alerts. Maya pulled out her phone. The screen flashed with conflicting messages. One from the county office. Mandatory evacuation order. Pine Valley Sector 3. Proceed to designated shelters. Another, from the State Emergency Services. Shelter in place. High wind warning. Roads closing. Do not attempt to travel. Chaos. Complete, contradictory chaos. Mr. Henderson burst into the common room, his face pale and sweaty in the emergency lighting. He clutched his phone, his hand trembling. The lines are dead. All of them. I can't reach anyone. His voice was high-pitched, laced with raw panic. The calm, detached bureaucrat had evaporated, replaced by a terrified man stripped of his rulebook. But the buses! They were supposed to be here. County Emergency Services assured me. They're not here, Mr. Henderson, Maya said, her voice flat. And the fire island look out the window. The orange glow outside wasn't just on the horizon anymore. It pulsed and flickered violently, casting monstrous dancing shadows on the walls of the orphanage. Ember rained against the windows, tiny, glowing sparks that promised an inferno just beyond their walls. The roar, once distant, was now a deep, hungry rumble, the sound of a living beast approaching. No, this can't be happening, Henderson whimpered, clutching his head. He looked utterly lost, a ship without a compass in a raging storm. We must shelter in place. That was the last official instruction. The buses are coming. They have to be coming. He stared at Maya with desperate, wild eyes, clinging to the last shred of his crumbling authority. No one leaves. It's too dangerous. We must wait for official instruction. Wait for what, Mr. Henderson? Maya retorted, her patience completely gone. Wait for the roof to fall in? Wait for these children to suffocate? She pointed to Leo, who was now visibly struggling, his small body shaking with each desperate gasp. This isn't a drill. This isn't a form you can fill out. This is real, and your plan failed. He stumbled back, aghast. You cannot speak to me like that, Miss Torres. I am the director. I forbid anyone from leaving. Think of the liability. Think of the paperwork if something goes wrong outside official channels. His voice rose to a panicked shriek, trying to reassert control in the face of his utter powerlessness. Unauthorized transport is a direct breach of protocol. I will not allow it. But his words were hollow, drowned out by the escalating roar of the fire and the rising fear in the children's cries. Maya looked at the terrified faces, at Leo's struggling breaths, at the inferno rapidly consuming their world. The choice was clear. The system had not just failed. It had vanished. leaving them to burn. And she would not let that happen. Not on her watch. A primal resolve solidified in Maya's chest. The time for discussion, for pleas, for appeals to reason, was over. Henderson was a dead man walking, a ghost clinging to a rulebook while the world burned around him. She wouldn't let him take these children with him. "Miss Jenkins, Sarah," Maya called out to the two other caregivers, her voice cutting through the rising din. "Start gathering the kids' emergency bags, their meds, anything crucial. We're going, now." Miss Jenkins, a seasoned caregiver with years of experience, didn't hesitate. She'd seen the fear in Maya's eyes, and more importantly, the escalating danger outside. "Right away, Maya." Sarah, younger and more timid, looked at Henderson, then at Maya, her eyes wide with terror, but she quickly followed Miss Jenkins' lead, her loyalty to Maya outweighing her fear of the director. Henderson, spluttering, tried to intervene. "Miss Jenkins, Miss Torres, you will stop this at once. This is mutiny. I will call the police. I will have you all arrested." Maya ignored him. Her eyes scanned the emergency board in the darkened common room. The spare key for the old yellow bus was still clipped to the hook labeled Vehicle Maintenance. "The groundskeeper, mister." Peterson was away on medical leave, and Henderson, in his infinite wisdom, hadn't bothered to find a replacement key holder. Perfect. She unclipped the key, the cold metal, a comfort in her palm. "Miss Jenkins, get Leo wrapped in a blanket. We need him by a window for fresh air as soon as we're on the bus." Sarah, count heads. No one left behind. The next 10 minutes were a controlled explosion of activity. Maya, moving with a calm, almost surgical precision, directed the terrified children. "All right, everyone, listen to my voice. It's time for an adventure. We're going to play a game called Super Speedy Exit. Everyone needs to find their buddy and hold hands. We're going to walk very quickly to the big yellow bus. No running, just fast walking. Pretend you're secret agents." She kept her voice steady, even as the wind outside howled, rattling the building. The sound of the fire was a constant, terrifying roar now, closer than ever. Embers rained against the windows, miniature stars of destruction. The air inside was thick and acrid, making everyone cough. Leo, bundled in a thick blanket, looked up at her, his eyes glistening. "Are we going to be okay, Maya?" "Yes, buddy," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "We are going to be more than okay. We're going to be safe." They moved through the darkened halls, a line of small, frightened children clutching hands, guided by the two caregivers and Maya. Henderson stood in the main entrance, his face contorted with rage and fear, still shouting about protocols and lawsuits. "You cannot do this, Miss Torres! This is criminal!" "I will see you lose everything." Maya didn't even glance at him. Her focus was solely on the children. They reached the side door that led to the small gravel parking lot where the ancient yellow bus sat, a hulking, forgotten sentinel. Its paint was faded, its tires looked soft, but it was their only hope. "Miss Jenkins, start loading them. Sarah, check the back rows. Make sure everyone is seated and belted," Maya instructed, her voice cutting through the bluster of the wind. She swung open the bus door, the interior smelling faintly of dust and old gasoline. As the first few children clambered aboard, Henderson, fueled by a final, desperate surge of his misplaced authority, lunged for the bus door. "Stop! I forbid this! I will not allow you to take these children!" He planted himself in the doorway, his arms outstretched, a pathetic, trembling barrier. Maya stared at him, her gaze as cold and unforgiving as the night itself. The roar of the fire was deafening now, a hungry maw just beyond the tree line. The heat was palpable, pressing against the skin. She could hear the crackle and pop of trees exploding, the scent of burning wood overwhelming. "Mr. Henderson?" Maya's voice was low, barely audible above the inferno, but it carried an undeniable steel. "Get out of my way, now. These children are leaving, with or without your permission, with or without your protocol, your choice." He hesitated, a man torn between his ingrained obedience to rules and the terrifying reality unfolding before his eyes. He looked past Maya, his gaze falling on the flickering orange light consuming the forest, then back at the terrified faces of the children peering out from the bus. For a split second, a flicker of genuine fear, not for himself but for them, crossed his face. But then it was gone, replaced by a defensive scowl. "This is on you, Miss Torres," he shrieked, his voice cracking with frustrated fury. "You will be held responsible for every single breach. Every single one." He backed away, stumbling, still sputtering threats and accusations, but he was out of the doorway. Maya didn't waste another second. She climbed into the driver's seat, the old plastic worn smooth beneath her hands. She inserted the key, her heart thumping against her ribs. She turned it. The engine groaned. Once, twice. A wheezing, rattling cough that sounded like it might die. The children held their breath. Maya held hers. She turned the key again, praying. This time, with a shudder and a roar that vibrated through the entire bus, the engine caught. Smoke, not from the fire but from the ancient exhaust, billowed from the back. A wave of relieved murmurs swept through the bus. Maya slammed the door shut, locking Henderson, red-faced and impotent, outside. She put the bus in gear, the old transmission grinding. The bus lurched forward, slowly, heavily, turning away from the burning orphanage and towards the unknown, smoke-choked road. As they pulled away, she caught a glimpse of the children's home through the rearview mirror. The roof was already starting to glow. The old yellow bus coughed and wheezed down the narrow, winding country road, its single working headlight cutting a pathetic swath through the smoke-choked darkness. Inside, the children, initially quieted by the sheer terror of escape, were now restless, their small bodies jostling with every bump and swerve. The air, though better than inside the burning orphanage, was still thick with the acrid stench of pine resin and burning plastic. Leo coughed intermittently, his breathing still ragged, but less strained than before. Maya gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She could barely see 10 feet in front of the bus. The trees that lined the road were ghostly silhouettes, and the glowing embers, swirling in the wind, looked like malevolent fireflies. The only guidance she had was the faint, desperate hope that this road, though remote, would lead them to safety. The community center? 5 miles, she kept repeating to herself. Just 5 more miles. Just as a sliver of desperate hope began to bloom in her chest, a harsh, flashing blue and red light pierced the smoky darkness ahead. A siren, muffled by the wind and the roar of the fire, pulsed ominously. "Oh no," Maya breathed, her stomach plummeting. A roadblock. She slowed the bus, the ancient brakes squealing in protest. The flashing lights resolved into a police cruiser, angled across the road, effectively blocking passage. Standing in front of it, a flashlight beam cutting through the smoke, was a figure in uniform. Maya pulled the bus to a rattling halt, leaving just enough distance to avoid collision. The officer, a burly man with a thick mustache and an exhausted, irritated expression, approached the bus, his flashlight beam sweeping across its dirty yellow exterior. He peered through the smoky windshield, his expression hardening. He rapped sharply on the door. Maya took a deep breath, trying to compose herself, and opened it. The officer, Deputy Evans, looked frayed, his uniform smudged with ash, his voice rough. "Ma'am, this road is closed. Are you deaf? You need to turn this bus around immediately. This is an active fire zone." "Deputy, please, listen to me," Maya pleaded, gesturing vaguely to the back of the bus where the children's faces were barely visible in the dim interior light. "I'm Maya Torres from the Pine Valley Children's Home. The orphanage is being overrun by the fire. We couldn't wait for official transport. These are 23 children. Some of them have medical needs. We're heading to the community center. It's the designated safe zone for our sector." Deputy Evans stared at her, his jaw tight. "Pine Valley Children's Home? Listen, ma'am, I have my orders. All traffic from this sector is being diverted to the East County Fairgrounds. The community center is not an approved evacuation point for your zone, and this road is restricted. You are creating a hazard, moving against traffic flow, and entering an area we're trying to clear." "But the orphanage is burning down," Maya insisted, her voice rising in desperation. "We were given conflicting alerts, no clear instructions, and Mr. Henderson, the director, he wouldn't let us leave. We had to go. There was no time." Deputy Evans held up a gloved hand, cutting her off. "I understand you're stressed, ma'am, but you've breached multiple protocols. You've taken an unapproved vehicle, operated it outside official channels, and now you're attempting to bypass an emergency checkpoint. These children need to be processed at the designated triage center at the fairgrounds. You need to turn this bus around, proceed to the East County Fairgrounds, and surrender this vehicle for inspection." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, warning tone. "If you don't comply, I'll be forced to detain you for obstructing emergency services." "Detain me?" Maya's voice cracked with disbelief. "I just saved these children from burning alive, and you want to detain me? What about them? Leo here, he has asthma. He needs clean air, not a detour to some fairground that's miles further away, through who knows what kind of smoke." She gestured to the back, to the small, pale face of Leo peering over a seat, his eyes wide and terrified. Deputy Evans glanced briefly at the child, then his face hardened again. My orders are clear, ma'am. Procedures are in place for a reason. I cannot allow you to put these children, or my officers, at further risk by ignoring a direct order. You will turn around. Now. He put a hand on the doorframe, his posture unyielding. He was the system, unbending, uncaring, and infuriatingly absolute. A sudden, sharp flash of light and the blare of a distant horn erupted from the road behind them. Another car, clearly frantic to escape the encroaching inferno, was trying to push through the roadblocks further back. Deputy Evans, momentarily distracted, turned his head, yelling into his radio. Unit 34, we have a breach on Sector Alpha. Need backup. It was a split second, a tiny window of opportunity, but it was all Maya needed. Her gaze locked on the narrow strip of gravel and dirt just to the right of the police cruiser, a rough shoulder that was technically off the road. It would be a rough ride, but the bus was old and sturdy. Her decision was instantaneous. Every fiber of her being screamed to obey, to turn around, to submit. But then she pictured Leo's struggling breaths, the orphanage engulfed in flames, the utter failure of the plan. "Hold on, everyone!" she yelled, her voice hoarse, and slammed her foot down on the gas pedal. The old bus, with a groan and a violent lurch, surged forward. Deputy Evans, caught off guard, stumbled back, shouting. The bus swerved, its large tires churning up gravel and dirt, scraping past the front of the police cruiser with inches to spare. Maya wrestled the steering wheel, fighting to keep the bus from skidding into the ditch. The children shrieked, a mix of fear and exhilaration. Deputy Evans, realizing what was happening, was roaring into his radio, his face a mask of furious disbelief. "She's fleeing! Code 3! Repeat, unauthorized vehicle fleeing. Request immediate backup and pursuit. Yellow school bus, heading north on Willow Creek Road." Maya didn't look back. Her eyes were fixed on the rough, uneven road ahead, disappearing into the swirling, smoky darkness. The sound of Deputy Evans' enraged shouts faded, replaced by the thumping of her own heart and the determined, rattling roar of the old bus engine. She was a criminal now. But she was also, unequivocally, saving lives. The journey to the community center felt like an eternity. The bus bumped and groaned over the rough road, the children inside a mix of terrified silence and sporadic, nervous chatter. Maya, her muscles aching from the strain of wrestling the steering wheel, drove with an almost tunnel vision, her eyes scanning for any sign of the modest brick building she knew so well. The smoke thinned slightly as they moved away from the immediate fire zone, allowing the streetlights of the small town to pierce through the haze like faint beacons. Finally, a familiar sign. Pine Valley Community Center. Relief, sharp and exhilarating, washed over Maya, so potent it almost made her weep. She pulled the bus into the brightly lit, chaotic parking lot, where a handful of other cars and emergency vehicles were already gathered. She cut the engine, and the sudden silence felt deafening after the constant roar of the fire and the rattling of the bus. "We're here," she announced, her voice hoarse but triumphant. "We made it." A wave of tired cheers and relieved sobs erupted from the children. Miss Jenkins and Sarah, pale but resolute, began to unbuckle seatbelts and calm the younger ones. Maya was the first off the bus, taking a deep, ragged breath of the comparatively cleaner air. She was met almost immediately by a woman in a bright yellow safety vest, her clipboard clutched to her chest. This was Brenda Thorne, the harried shelter administrator, a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her expression was a mixture of exhaustion and acute irritation. "Who are you?" Brenda demanded, her voice sharp, her eyes scanning Maya's soot-smudged clothes. "We don't have you on our manifest. Where is your official transport documentation? And what on earth is this bus?" She gestured dismissively at the ancient vehicle, as if it were an alien spaceship. "I'm Maya Torres, from the Pine Valley Children's Home," Maya explained, trying to keep her tone calm and professional despite the surge of frustration. "We evacuated the children. The orphanage was in the direct path of the fire. County services didn't arrive, so I brought them here." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "The Pine Valley Children's Home? But your designated evacuation point was the East County Fairgrounds. And your staff complement was supposed to be delivered by official transport. We don't have capacity for unscheduled arrivals, Miss Torres. Do you have a list of these children? Medical histories? Any contact information for their legal guardians?" Her tone was accusatory, as if Maya had deliberately inconvenienced her. "I have some of their emergency contact cards," Maya said, fumbling in her pockets for the small stack of laminated cards she'd grabbed in the frantic escape. Their medical files are back at the orphanage. I didn't have time to grab everything. It was burning down. Just then, a man in scrubs, looking equally stressed, approached, rubbing his temples. This was Dr. Allen, one of the volunteer physicians. He glanced at the line of children now slowly disembarking the bus, some coughing, some sniffling, all clearly traumatized. Brenda, what's going on here? We have 23 unexpected children. Some of them look like they have significant smoke inhalation. I need a clear space, quick triage, and someone to log their names. Where are their records? Brenda threw up her hands, exasperated. She doesn't have them, Dr. Allen. She just showed up in this contraption. She's completely off manifest. She turned back to Maya, her voice laced with thinly veiled contempt. You've completely disrupted our intake process, Miss Torres. We have a system here. A very delicate system that is already stretched to its breaking point. You can't just arrive with a busload of unscheduled children and expect us to conjure resources out of thin air. Maya felt a hot flush of anger. I expect you to help them. They're children who just escaped a fire. Some of them need medical attention now, not a lecture on your system. She pointed to Leo, who was now being helped off the bus by Miss Jenkins, still wheezing. He's asthmatic, and he's had a rough night. Dr. Allen, despite his initial frustration, saw the urgency in Maya's voice and the clear distress of the children. He sighed, rubbing his face. All right, Brenda, find us a corner. We'll make it work. Miss Torres, bring the boy here. We'll get him on oxygen. Maya nodded, grateful for the small concession. As she ushered Leo towards the makeshift medical station, she could still hear Brenda Thorne's indignant murmurs to another volunteer. Unbelievable. Some people just think they can ignore all the rules. The sheer audacity. Maya bit back a retort. She was too tired, too relieved the children were safe, to engage in a battle with another cog in the bureaucratic machine. She helped settle the children, reassuring them, finding them blankets and snacks offered by the other volunteers. She watched as Dr. Place, like Suppliance tutored. Allen carefully administered oxygen to Leo, his breathing slowly evening out. The sight was a balm to her frayed nerves. They were safe. That was all that mattered. For now, the fragile sense of relief Maya felt was short-lived. Just as the last of the children were being settled into cots, some already drifting off to sleep, a familiar, unwelcome voice cut through the hum of the shelter. There she is! That's her, officer. That's the woman who absconded with our property and endangered minors. Maya's head snapped up. Standing in the entrance of the gymnasium, bathed in the harsh fluorescent light, were Mr. Henderson and Deputy Evans. Henderson's face was a mask of self-righteous fury, while Deputy Evans looked grim and determined. Behind them, two other officers stood, their expressions equally stern. A cold dread coiled in Maya's stomach. She stood slowly, her tired eyes meeting Henderson's triumphant glare. Miss Torres, Deputy Evans said, his voice devoid of any warmth. You are under arrest. You are being detained for questioning regarding the unauthorized use of a municipal vehicle, fleeing a law enforcement officer, and multiple counts of reckless endangerment of minors. A gasp rippled through the small group of caregivers and volunteers who had gathered around Maya. Miss Jenkins stepped forward, her face pale. Deputy, you can't be serious. She saved these children. The orphanage burned down. Henderson, however, puffed out his chest. Saved them? She put them in grave peril? She ignored official instructions, commandeered a bus that was not roadworthy, and fled from a police officer. Her actions were not only insubordinate but criminal. He turned to the shelter administrator, Brenda Thorne, who was watching with a mix of shock and grudging satisfaction. I want her formally terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct and dereliction of duty. You fired me for saving lives? Maya's voice trembled, not from fear, but from a raw, incandescent rage. Your protocol would have left those children to burn. You chose paperwork over their lives. My decisions are based on established procedures, Miss Torres. Henderson shrieked, his face turning an angry red. Procedures designed to ensure safety and prevent liability. Your impulsive, reckless actions have jeopardized everything. You have undermined the very fabric of this institution. Deputy Evans stepped forward, placing a hand on Maya's arm. Ma'am, please don't resist. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. I don't care about my rights right now. Maya ripped her arm away, her eyes blazing. Look at them. They're safe. Because I defied him and you. Because I chose humanity over your damn rulebook. She gestured wildly towards the children, some of whom were now sitting up in their cots, their young faces registering confusion and fear as they watched the scene unfold. Leo, who had been resting on his cot, seeing Maya surrounded by officers, let out a small, terrified cry. "Maya! Don't take Maya!" The sound of his voice, filled with such raw fear and desperation, twisted Maya's gut. The other children, too, began to stir, their quiet sanctuary shattered by the arrival of the authorities. Deputy Evans, ignoring the pleas, pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "I'm sorry, ma'am. These are my orders. You've committed serious offenses." With a click that echoed brutally in the suddenly quiet gymnasium, he secured the cuffs around Maya's wrists. The cold metal bit into her skin, a stark symbol of the injustice. She was led away, a prisoner in the very place where she had brought 23 children to safety. As she was escorted towards the exit, past the rows of cots, she looked back one last time. Her gaze met Leo's. His small, pale face was contorted in a silent sob, tears streaming down his cheeks. He stretched out a hand towards her, a futile gesture of desperate attachment. It was the last thing she saw. The heartbreaking image of the child she had saved, now terrified and alone, watching his rescuer be led away like a criminal. The door swung shut behind her, plunging her into the cool night air, and then into the suffocating confines of a sterile, temporary interrogation room at the command post. The air conditioning hummed, a stark contrast to the roar of the fire she'd just escaped. She was placed in a cold metal chair, the handcuffs still biting her wrists, and left alone in the stark, unforgiving light. The rage, hot and righteous, simmered within her, but it was overshadowed by a profound, aching despair. She had risked everything, done what was undeniably right, and for it, she was being treated like a dangerous criminal. The system, it seemed, valued its rules far more than the lives of its most vulnerable. The interrogation room was stark, sterile, and cold. Maya sat in the metal chair, her wrists chafed by the handcuffs, her body aching with exhaustion and despair. Deputy Evans had returned, his face still flushed with righteous indignation, clutching a notepad. He began to drone through a list of questions, his tone accusatory, clearly enjoying his momentary triumph. "Miss Torres, let's go over this again. You admit to taking the bus without permission?" "I admit to saving 23 children from a fire that was actively consuming their home, Deputy," Maya replied, her voice rough. "And yes, I used the only vehicle available because your official channels were nowhere to be found." "And you admit to ignoring my direct order to turn the vehicle around?" "I admit to bypassing a roadblock to get those children to safety because you were going to send us into further danger, miles away, while a child with asthma was struggling to breathe." Deputy Evans bristled, about to launch into another lecture on procedure, when the door to the interrogation room swung open with an almost imperceptible creak. A woman stood in the doorway, her presence immediately commanding. She was tall, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, framed by short, practical auburn hair. Her National Guard uniform was immaculate, her shoulders squared, displaying a rank that gleamed, Colonel Wallace. Her very stillness radiated authority, a stark contrast to the flustered deputy. Deputy Evans, mid-sentence, faltered. "Colonel Wallace, ma'am, I'm just conducting my interview here." Colonel Wallace didn't even glance at him. Her gaze was fixed solely on Maya, a direct, assessing look that seemed to peel away layers of fatigue and anger, seeing something deeper. She held a tablet in one hand, her fingers subtly working the screen. The air in the room, previously charged with tension and accusation, now hummed with an entirely different kind of power. "Deputy." Colonel Wallace's voice was calm, measured, but imbued with an unquestionable steel that brooked no argument. "Step outside for a moment. I need a word with Miss Torres." Deputy Evans hesitated for a fraction of a second, clearly loath to relinquish his control, but the colonel's gaze was unwavering. He swallowed, snapped to attention, and mumbled, "Yes, ma'am," before retreating from the room, leaving the door ajar. Colonel Wallace closed the door behind him, turning her full attention to Maya. She didn't offer a chair or a friendly smile. Her expression remained unreadable, professional. "Miss Torres, my name is Colonel Wallace. I'm coordinating the overall disaster response for this sector." Maya simply nodded, bracing herself for another round of accusations, albeit from a higher authority. "Deputy Evans' report paints a very specific picture," Wallace continued, her voice devoid of judgment. "Unauthorized vehicle, resisting arrest, endangering minors, gross insubordination from orphanage staff, all from a Mr. Henderson." She paused, her eyes still on Maya. I've just reviewed his emergency log. Your director made repeated calls to county emergency services throughout the afternoon and evening. Maya stayed silent, her heart pounding. He was told repeatedly to shelter in place. He was informed that official evacuation buses were en route for the Pine Valley Children's Home, scheduled for an estimated arrival time of 22:30. Wallace finally looked down at her tablet, swiping a finger across the screen. Your estimated departure time from the orphanage, according to Deputy Evans' timeline, was 21:15. Maya felt a flicker of something, a tiny spark of hope amidst the despair. This woman was looking at the facts. Tell me, Miss Torres, Wallace said, her eyes returning to Maya, sharp and inquisitive. Why did you leave at 21:15 when your director was still being advised to wait until 22:30? Maya took a deep breath, and for the first time since being handcuffed, felt a surge of defiant clarity. Because the fire wasn't waiting, Colonel, and the children couldn't breathe. Mr. Henderson was prioritizing paperwork over lives. The smoke was too thick. Embers were hitting the windows. The power was out. One of my children, Leo, he's severely asthmatic. He was struggling. I saw what was happening. I couldn't wait. Colonel Wallace listened, her expression still neutral, her gaze unwavering. She didn't interrupt, didn't show any emotion. She just absorbed Maya's words, her fingers subtly adjusting the display on her tablet. As Maya finished, the colonel turned the tablet towards her. On the screen was a detailed satellite map. A terrifying, pulsating red blob, constantly expanding, marked the fire's progression. The Pine Valley Children's Home was marked by a small yellow pin. The map showed a clear timeline of the inferno's spread. At 21:04, Colonel Wallace began, her voice crisp. The fire, fueled by unprecedented high winds, jumped the Pine Creek Gorge, a natural firebreak we had deemed secure just hours earlier. It completely engulfed the ridge, separating the gorge from your facility. Her finger traced a line on the map, showing the rapid, almost instantaneous engulfment. Your evacuation buses, miss? Torres were still 30 miles out, bogged down in traffic and already being rerouted due to new outbreaks. They never would have reached you. They couldn't have. Her finger then hovered over the yellow pin, marking the orphanage. The Pine Valley Children's Home, she stated, her voice quiet but firm, was completely destroyed. Satellite thermal imaging confirmed the roof collapsed, and the structure was fully compromised at 21:28. Maya stared at the map, then at the colonel. 21:28. They had left at 21:15. 13 minutes. 13 minutes had separated them from complete incineration. A shudder ran through her, a mix of horror and profound, sickening relief. Henderson's plan would have doomed them all. Colonel Wallace put the tablet down on the small, metal table between them. Her eyes, serious and direct, met Maya's. Deputy Evans and Mr. Henderson, having been called back into the room, now stood stiffly by the door, their earlier bluster completely gone, replaced by a stunned, horrified silence as they processed the colonel's words and the image on the screen. Miss Torres, Colonel Wallace said, her voice cutting through the heavy air, your actions were, as Deputy Evans correctly stated, in direct violation of a shelter-in-place advisory. You knowingly operated an unsanctioned vehicle. You disobeyed a direct order from a peace officer, and you caused significant disruption to established emergency protocols. Maya braced herself, the familiar weight of injustice pressing down. However, the colonel continued, her voice gaining a new, distinct inflection, you were also the only person who correctly assessed the situation on the ground. You demonstrated an acute understanding of the immediate, evolving threat. You showed initiative, courage, and a complete refusal to leave vulnerable lives behind. She paused, allowing her words to sink in, her gaze sweeping over Deputy Evans and then settling firmly on a now pale Mr. Henderson, who looked like he was about to be physically ill. What you did wasn't by the book, Miss Torres, Colonel Wallace said, finally rising from her chair. She walked over to Maya, stopping directly in front of her. Her hand reached out, not to touch, but to gesture to Maya's cuffed wrists. What you did was an act of heroism. She then turned her head slightly, her gaze sharp, cutting, and utterly dismissive as she looked at Deputy Evans. Deputy, get these cuffs off her, now. Evans, visibly flustered and utterly deflated, fumbled for his keys. The click of the handcuffs unlocking was the sweetest sound Maya had ever heard. She rubbed her freed wrists, a quiet, almost imperceptible gesture. Mr. Henderson, Colonel Wallace said, her voice now cold and hard, Your institution was given clear instructions based on incomplete data. You chose rigid adherence to protocol over dynamic assessment of imminent danger. That is a failure of leadership, sir. A catastrophic one. She didn't wait for his stuttered reply. Deputy Evans, you followed your orders, but you also demonstrated a distinct lack of critical judgment in a rapidly deteriorating situation. We will be having a much longer conversation about that later. Wallace then turned back to Maya, a ghost of a smile finally touching her lips. Miss Torres, your actions saved those children. We need more people like you in command, not fewer. She extended her hand. Thank you, for your courage and for your humanity. Maya shook her hand, a firm, surprising grip. The injustice, the despair, the fear began to recede, replaced by a surge of profound relief and vindication. She walked out of the command post, the cool night air feeling crisp and clean on her face. Her steps were light. As she re-entered the community center gymnasium, the chatter and the gentle sounds of children sleeping filled the air. Leo, who had somehow stayed awake, saw her first. Maya, he cried out, his voice a joyful squeal. He scrambled off his cot and ran towards her, throwing his small arms around her legs. Maya knelt, her arms wrapping tightly around him, burying her face in his hair. The smell of smoke still clung to him, but beneath it, she could smell something else, the scent of hope and life and the overwhelming proof that she had done the right thing. Around them, the other children stirred, and one by one, their small faces broke into relieved smiles. She was a criminal in the eyes of some. But here, among the lives she had saved, she was exactly what the commander had called her, a hero. Her future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long, terrifying night, Maya Torres felt profoundly, defiantly at peace.